Hello and good day everyone. It's been a while since I made my video. I've been so busy lately for so many reasons. So without further ado, let's get started. Korea's history. It starts with a small nation maneuvering between larger and more powerful countries that surround it. History, and honestly it needs to deal with China, Russia, which is the Soviet Union a long time ago, Japan and the United States of America. Korea has never on the center of the world, but it has often been the center conflict between larger and more powerful nations. Good day everyone. Our video for today is about the history of North Korea and South Korea, in which they same country but developed differently from all the way up to till today. This story is more cover on North Korea and South Korea. But before we can talk about these countries themselves, we need to start on how they created. And for that we need to start at the beginning of 1895. The reason for this specific date is because for thousands of years, East Asia is dominated by China. China had a large population and military, the best product and technology, the most efficient education and bureaucracy, and the most of all they used their power and dominance to colonize country and other people. China decided on a system of tributary states. But wait, what is tributary states mean? Well, tributary states is a state subordinate to a more powerful neighboring state. The tributary states send a regular gift or tribute to the superior state as a token of submission. Example of this is if Philippines will visit the China, then the Philippines need to bring a gift or token to superior of China as a sign of their good relationship. So Japan, Cambodia, Malaysia, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Tibet, Yukio, and the Korea are all paid tribute to China. This country is so powerful that for hundreds of years of its history, no other country on earth come ever close to this industrial, economic, and political power of China. And unlike any other vassal, Korea wasn't just ordinary tributary states. Korea adopted the form of government of China, the religion of Confucianism, and closed itself off to the world just like what China did. Korea had adopted the China head doing things to such an extent that they were often better than the China themselves. But what many did not realize at the time was China was declining, a slow decline, so slow in fact that nobody realized it for hundreds of years, because around 1500 the first European sailed around Africa and established Chinese tributary states. At the beginning it doesn't seems like a problem at first, but the Portuguese established colonies, taking away from China. This was soon followed by other European, such as the Dutch, the Spanish, the British, and the French, establishing colonies in Chinese tributary states. And with every new colony, China lost its tributary states, and until the year of 1839, when the First Opium War began in China itself, it was attacked by the European powers. Is one tributary states which is remain safe and unharmed, and it is the Korean country. While Sri Lanka was taken by the British, Vietnam by the French, and the Chinese ports by the European powers, Korea had to deal with only minor skirmishes from France, United States, and the Japan. But other than that, Korea remain a puppet states. Wait again, what is puppet states means? A government that is appointed by and whose affairs are directed by an outside authority that may impose hardships on those governed. An example of this is the country of Abkhazia. It is a puppet state that depends on Russia. The economy of Abkhazia is heavily integrated with Russia and uses the Russian ruble as its currency. About half of Abkhazia's state budget is financed with aid money from Russia. Most Abkhazians have Russian passports. Let's go back to history. But then everything changed when the empire upon which is the Fire Nation base attacked by a neighboring country such as Japan. And because of this, the Fifth Sino-Japanese War happened, the war between the Qing dynasty of China and the Empire of Japan in the year of 1894 until 1895. Just 40 years earlier, Japan was like China and Korea. They shut their country off from the rest of the world until the United States forced Japan to open up. During that time, Japan is busy modernizing its own country, modern industry, and modern government and modern army. This modern Japanese army was so victorious, and as a result of this, they become dominant. The power of East Asia shifted from China to Japan, and Korea has no choice just to shift it also. For more than 1,000 years of being a vassal state of China, Korea has now an independent country, not because it sought independence, but because independence was thrust upon them by the Japanese, and this is why the year of 1985 is such an important year in Korean history, because this is the year that Korea stopped being a Chinese tributary and isolated from the rest of the world and became an independent Korea. And this independent Korea was surrounded by countries which is far and more powerful than itself. And so because of this, Korea need to learn how to maneuvering between the largest and most power to secure its own survival. This time Korea has surrounded by more powerful countries remain truest to the Soviet Union, which is the Russia People's Republic of China, Japan, and the United States. These are all the most powerful country of the world. All of them had a stake on Korean nation. This newly independent Korea faced many difficulties. To the west was the declining China. To the north was the emboldened of Russia, which sought greater influence in East Asia. And to the east were the Empire of Japan. Itself was surrounded by more and powerful and advanced European empire and was desperately seeking way to secure its independence from European powers, which creating colonies closer and closer to Japan. Each of this nation are far larger, far more advanced and far more powerful than Korea. So what did the Korea do? Korea decided modernize and westernized, using Japan as a model to do. Korea reorganized its military to be more Western, receiving modern training and weapons from Russia. It improved its education system by opening public school, like college and universities. In fact, many of the universities in Korea today were founded in this time of Korean Empire. The Korea established industrialization by investing in new machines, such as low-cost silk spinning and weaving machine, which could outcompete high-cost manufacturing abroad and make a lot of profit by exporting its cheap silk to rich nations. It built new infrastructure such as electric streetcar and water companies, telephone lines and power grid, and its government was to become more Western, with even royalty donning the clothes of Western monarch in order to emulate them. In 1897 it even changed its name. For centuries the nation inhabiting the Korean Peninsula was actually called Joseon, but was remained the Korean Empire. Korea had moved away from China and was now moving toward closer ties with Russia, hoping that Russia could not only help Korea to industrialize, but also to help secure Korean independence. But why did Korea seek close ties with Russia when it just gained independence from China? Well, because during of those times Japan had been discussing invading Korea for almost a decade. In fact, Japan already decided Korea was an inferior nation which failed to modernize and therefore ought to be conquered by the superior Japanese nation. And this point of view is comparable to how European nations view African and Asian nation at that time. And so with both Japan and Russia wanting to control over Korea in order to gain more influence in East Asia, the two sides fight for a war in 1904. which Japan won the fight. As a result, Korea was forced to become a protectorate of Japan in 1905, but Korea was too weak to hold off the Japanese, and in the year of 1910 Korea became officially a colony of the Empire of Japan. This period of history where China lost its position as the dominant power of East Asia. They called it the humiliations of the century, but while China is humiliated, Korea was used, abused, and subdued. Japan treated Korea as its colony. This meant that Japan sought to civilize the Korean by banning the Korean language, custom, and the tradition in favor of the Japanese language, custom, and traditions. An example of this is that Korean were forced to change their names to Japanese name. Korean labor was exploited to harvest resources. Korean infrastructure built to transport those resources to Japan, and those resources turned to product used for Japanese consumption and expanding Japanese control over Korea and other areas of East Asia. While various aspects improved for the Korean, the literacy rate went up. Factories were built and infrastructure improved. These improvements were combined with a regime so brutal they would eventually be considered a war of crime at the Tokyo trial. A prominent example of the brutality was the establishment of agencies that lured women and girls to their offices with the promise of better education and work, only for them to find out that they will be enslaved and sent across the Japanese Empire to perform intimate services and be used by Japanese men whatever they please. The effect of the Japanese occupation on Korea was so severe that when Japan lost its war on World War II, and had to end its occupation on Korea. The Korea had lacked of any administrative and technical knowledge and expertise on the government job. So what happened? The Korean had a hard time to run their own country. This is because the Japanese Empire were exclusively used their own Japanese citizen to administer the Korean country, meaning there were almost no Korean left anymore who had the experience in running their own country. And in 1945 the Japanese were leaving Korea. But while they were living, the Soviet army of Russia is arriving, and so once again Korea is defeated again by far more and powerful nation, and in this time the United States of America and the Soviet Union of Russia. During this time the Cold War has just begun, and during this time of war the main weapon used were ideology and proxy wars, with the Soviet Union and its allies turning towards the Soviet-style communism and the United States and its allies turning towards capitalism, and each of this side wanted to control over Korea for its strategic position in East Asia. And because of this the USA become afraid that the Soviet will all occupy all of Korea. Because of this the United States tasked a young officer to come up with a proposal on how to split the Korea between the Soviet and the United States. Without consulting the expert on Korea, they took the National Geographic map and decided that a line on the map, called the 38 parallel, would be a good way to divide Korea so that each side would be half the Korean territory. To surprise of the United States, the Soviet or the Russia accepted the division, unaware that the Russian Empire discussed sharing Korea along the exact same line with the Japan, and they were giving the Soviet exactly what they wanted all along. And so after more than 1,000 years of united Korean Peninsula, the country was torn apart into two parts, which is the Soviet of Russia and the capitalism of United States. This split was meant to last for 5 years, after which Korea will turn back to Korean in a united Korean states. Most Korean were demanded immediate independence, but their voices were just ignored. The Soviet Union of Russia and the United States met several times to discuss how Korea will be united. The Soviet proposed Lee Won-hyun as the leader of unified Korea, but this was rejected by the United States. Soviet proposed both sides withdraw and let the Korean people from their own united government. This too was rejected by the United States, and because of this the United States brought a problem to the United Nations, which declared that both sides should withdraw and free elections should be held. But the Soviet boycotted the resolution, arguing that the United Nations could not guarantee fair elections. As time went by, the two nations diverged over time, with the Soviet Union and the United States Each established a different national government in the Korean territory they controlled. By this time in the north, a provisional government was created by the Soviet Union in 1946. Under the leader of Kim Il-sung. He was chosen by the Soviet Union to lead North Korea. For his close ties with the Soviet government, North Korea faced many of the same issues as previous Korean entities faced by the powerful Soviet Union on the north and the powerful United States in the south. The Korean country never unified again. Today, the South Korean country is becoming more booming on their business. The Kia and Samsung are one of the most popular and gave economic growth to the country, and the popular of K-pop worldwide gave in a big in fact to the million of teen and adult. While in the north, the North Korean dictator Kim Il-jung is in his throne and continue his father legacy. That's it for today. If you like the video, please don't forget to subscribe and like my channel.